Welcome, everybody, to the Wizard of Radical Self-Respect. My name is Jared Mello, and normally on this channel, talk about narcissism. We'll do some interviews, talk about relationships, and also talk more about the healing process, the steps to take to get to where you want to be. And that's what some of the audience on Facebook there was requesting. So that's what we're going to start talking about as well, because I do think that's important. And I try to talk about all of the different stages here, where you're first identifying what you're dealing with, whether it's a narcissistic partner, borderline partner, or whatever. Then you kind of recognize your part in the whole thing. And then you move forward to be the happiest and healthiest version of yourself. Now, if you're here, please remember to subscribe to the channel. If you like this kind of content, hit the notification bell. And please remember to like the video if you liked it at the end. Also, comment here as well. Comments will also really help. So a lot of times people that are on my Facebook, they'll comment on my Facebook stuff, but then they won't comment here. But comments here will be just as helpful, if not more. Now, today, what I'm going to do is I'm going to follow up on the reel that I made yesterday. And I think this might be a pattern that I do moving forward. I'm going to make a reel and then expand on that reel in a live video like this. And the reel I made yesterday was when the narcissistic person will pull the addict card to defend and excuse their behavior. Now, I want to make this part very clear first, too, that addiction is a real thing. Right? There are people who have addiction issues, whether it's alcohol, drugs, gambling, sex, or whatever. And so I don't want to minimize what those people are going through. It is a thing. It is a thing. But if someone's really trying to get better, they will often have the footwork and the effort to show for it. So what I would caution people, what I would caution them to look for is when you see a narcissistic person, or any kind of person for that matter. It doesn't just have to be a narcissist. It can be any kind of person. A person just struggling with addiction, whether it's a mental health issue, anxiety, depression, bipolar, or whatever. It doesn't really matter. But if they're going to continue to do the same old things, and then when they're called out, they're going to use the addict card as a get out of jail free card. Oh, I'm an addict. I can't help myself. Oh, I'm an addict. You should look at me in this way. I can't help what I'm doing. That is a deflection. Now, if you go to any sort of AA, NA, they will tell you through our inability to accept personal responsibility, many of us create our own problems. So clearly what they're saying with that is, yeah, you might be an addict. Yeah, you might be an alcoholic, but it still means you have to take accountability for your side of the street. You acknowledge the fact you're an addict. You acknowledge the fact that you have an issue, but then most importantly, you do the footwork to get better on that issue. Just admitting it, while that is a good step, but just admitting it, but then doing nothing differently, that's only going to do so much. And another mentor that I used to have would always say to me, Jared, if nothing changes, nothing changes. And I remember that one all the time, because how can we expect to get different results if we're doing the same old things? And when someone pulls the addict card like that, to me, it's a little disrespectful to the people that are addicts that are putting in the footwork. They're just using that name to try to dismiss or minimize their own wrongdoing. And here's the thing. If you're in a relationship with someone who truly is an addict, narcissistic person or not, you really got to be honest with yourself about what you're willing to tolerate. Like, is drug use, like hardcore drug use, is that going to be a red line for you? Well, that's something you have to take into consideration. What about someone who says they're a sex addict and they can't stop having sex with other people? As the partner of someone like that, what are you honestly going to be able to put up with? And you really got to be honest with yourself, because for some people, in fact, I would say maybe most people, if your partner cheats, that's a red flag. And that's not something they're going to be able to forgive, or they would even want to forgive anyway. But I've heard some narcissistic people, because they are similar to addicts anyway. When they need the drug of narcissistic supply, they will do many of the same things an addict of drugs or alcohol will do. They will do anything to get their version of supply, whether it's sex, power, money, whatever it is, admiration. That is their version of a drug. So often I've heard them say something like, "Oh, I've cheated, but I'm an addict. I can't help myself." But that's how you know they're not really ready to change, right? When someone's not going to take personal responsibility, they're not going to take accountability, they're just trying to use that card as an excuse. Someone who's truly trying to get better, they may still relapse, but if you're doing all of the next right things, like in AA or NA, for example, they'll say to you, make sure you go to meetings, go to 90 meetings in 90 days, get a sponsor, start working on steps with your sponsor, and call someone before you ever pick up. If you do all of those things, it is the least likely that you will pick up and relapse. Now, is it impossible? No, nothing's impossible. But if you don't call that person before you pick up, yeah, it could happen. But more often than not, someone who does those things, they're going to be more likely to succeed. And in AA, they say it is seldom that those who have thoroughly followed our path have failed. And so that's as the person who's with an addict, or the narcissistic person who says they're an addict, when you see that and when you hear that, you know, okay, the effort will tell the real tale here. If they're doing the next right things and they're putting in the effort, maybe you would be more forgiving also of a slip. But if the pattern hasn't changed, if they're continuing to do the same old things, doing nothing different, you can't really expect to get any different results. So as the person with someone in this scenario, or even if it's a family member, if you don't see them doing things differently, and they're just saying the "I'm an addict" part as a get out of jail free card, that's not really too good. They're not taking accountability, and they're kind of playing the victim a little bit. And that's how you know they're not really willing to work on themselves at that point. Someone who truly is working on themselves, if they slip up, they'll own it and say, you know what? I messed up. I'm going to get back on the wagon again. I'm going to go extra hard at the meetings. I'm going to talk more about what's going on with me, make sure I call my sponsor and all that good stuff. They're going to put in that effort, and they're going to show some genuine contrition when they mess up. And of course, the best apology is changed behavior. And they're going to be able to say, yep, this is what I did wrong. I'm going to change my actions in the future. When someone just says, nope, I'm an addict, I can't help myself, that's how you know they're not really ready. They're not really ready, and they want to more than likely continue doing what they're doing. But when they don't truly want to continue doing what they're doing, you will see those actions change. You will see them take more accountability. You will see them take ownership of their side of the street. And I don't want to make it sound like it's extremely cut and dry, but that is how it is. Now, also to note, some people can have a bad day, and when they're stressed or having a bad day, their defects might come out first. And maybe they need to take a little bit of time away from the conversation, and they can come back later with the correct attitude and say, you know what, I might have said that before, but I know I got to take accountability here. I got to take personal responsibility and do what I got to do. And again, though, if you're a person in a romantic relationship with a narcissistic person or an addict, you've really got to be honest with yourself about what you're willing to tolerate. Don't pretend you're a better person than you really are, because if you do, chances are you're setting yourself up for resentment. So you got to know what your red lines are, and say maybe someone wasn't always an addict and they pick up maybe a drinking problem in a marriage, or they pick up a drinking problem in a romantic relationship. What do you do then? And that's up to you too. I can't make those decisions for you, but you really have to be honest with yourself about what you're willing to put up with, because often it can kind of snowball and build steam where it doesn't seem so bad right away, and the other partner can rationalize it to themselves a little bit and say, oh, it's just on the weekends, or it's just once in a while. He has a really stressful job. But notice this too. If you catch yourself making rationalizations like that about someone else's behavior, something to take note of. But If that snowball starts building steam and getting bigger, and all of a sudden it's not just on the weekends anymore, then maybe it's Thursday, then maybe it's daily. And that's how it can slowly become a big problem. And if you're that other person, you can have a conversation with them about it and try to say, hey, I care about you. I love you. I want to see you do better. And unfortunately, though, you can't help anybody that doesn't want to help themselves. That's the hardest part about addiction, in my opinion, is you can't give someone the desire to stop. You can't give someone the desire to change. And if someone's not willing to, they're just not going to. And it's hard for the other person to admit that. It's hard for the other person to accept that. And this is especially hard with parents when it comes to the kids. If they're struggling with addiction, you can't give them the desire. You can't give them the willingness. And especially with addiction, that is the number one thing. Because the first part is you got to stop the drug or alcohol use, for one. And then you got to understand, once you're clean, all right, is there a mental health issue that is also present? But the problem is, a lot of times that mental health issue won't even come up until about 6 months to a year down the road. You won't know for sure, because a lot of mental health symptoms can mimic stopping drinking, can mimic withdrawal. So you got to kind of get back to equilibrium. And if your equilibrium is still out of whack, which definitely does happen, right? A lot of times people who have trauma, maybe they've had narcissistic parents, they're much more likely to have anxiety disorders. So you get clean from drugs, you stop drinking, and a year has gone by, and you notice you're still unregulated, you're still dysregulated, you still have a lot of anxiety, you still have a lot of depression, but at least now you know what you're dealing with. And again, if you're the other person here, patience would be required, but remember, you can only work on your own side of the street. A lot of times people in these situations, they're codependents, and there are meetings for people that are codependent as well. All you can do is work on your side of the street and be honest with yourself. And then have boundaries, have hard lines like, hey, if this is what happens here, I'm out. But there is no right or wrong answer to this, because every situation is going to be a little bit different. I'm not going to pretend like all the situations are the same and there's going to be a common yes or a common no. This is exactly how it is. No, it's all going to depend on each situation. But remember, you can't give someone the willingness to change, and you're not going to be able to give them the desire to stop drinking, using, or doing whatever their drug of choice is. And when you know that, you got to have the acceptance. A lot of things come down to that serenity prayer. Grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. So much of life comes down to that prayer. And if you see someone you care about going off the deep end with drugs, alcohol, sex, or gambling, they got to bottom out more than likely. And that's the one thing that gives people the desire to change eventually, is when they bottom out. And what that bottom is changes for each person. I know there's a saying in the rooms that will say every bottom has a basement, and it can always get worse if they go back. So what you got to do, though, is just know if they're really willing to put in the work, they're putting in the footwork, putting in the effort, their actions will show it. They're going to try to do the next right things. And their actions will determine how willing they really are. If they're willing, they'll try to do something about it. And if they're not willing, they might do something half-assed. They might try to use the addict card to get away with what they want to get away with. And some of this will come down to the energy too. When you sense the energy of someone who's being genuine and genuinely wants to change, generally, you'll be able to pick up on that. But if someone's trying to get the attention off of their behavior by pulling the addict card, blame shifting, blaming you. Oh, if it wasn't for you, I wouldn't be drinking. If it wasn't for you, I wouldn't be cheating. If it wasn't for you, I wouldn't have to go escape and gamble. If you hear any of those things that are not taking accountability, not taking personal responsibility, that's a red flag. And that's an indicator they're not ready yet. They haven't hit their bottom yet. They're not ready. They're not willing to take accountability yet. And you got to act accordingly in that place, because you can't give them that willingness. And whatever you want to do in that situation, if you want to leave at that point, hey, I wouldn't blame you one bit. But I know it's not always that easy. Each situation has a lot of different variables, which is why it's harder for me to give general suggestions in these cases, because each individual case can be so different. And what I might say to one person is completely different than what I would say to another. But if this is a situation that you're in, please reach out to me, set up a coaching session so that I can go over it with you and I can give you the most accurate suggestions for your situation. Because again, each situation is going to be a little bit different. It's not going to be a one size fits all approach. But generally speaking, actions will show what someone's priorities are and if they have the willingness to do something different. Taking accountability is a good sign. Blame shifting, pulling the addict card, is not a good sign. And remember, not everyone is going to be having a great day. Sometimes people need to take a step back, and then they can come to the right decisions and attitude from there and say, okay, yeah, I messed up before, but I got to take accountability now. I'm going to do my best to change behavior, because the only real apology is changed behavior. So again, depends on the situation. And I'll be more than happy to give any of you out there individual suggestions if you reach out to me for a session. So if you got this far, please remember to like the video. If you liked it, comment below if you're in a situation similar to this. I know there are a lot of people who are. And my Facebook community, it's a bigger community there than it is here on YouTube. But I would like to build up this YouTube community as well, because I can speak longer on YouTube than I can on Facebook. Like, I make reels that are 60 seconds, but here on YouTube, there is no time limit. So we can kind of dive deeper here, and we can talk about the issues in a more nuanced and deep way. In a post, in a reel, you can only scratch the surface. But here, we can really dig into the issues a little bit. And the more people share, the more they'll be able to help themselves, and the more they will help other people. When people share honestly and are genuine about what's going on with them, that's what helps the most. That's what helps them the most and the most amount of people. So with that, thank you very much for watching, and have a great rest of your day.